So Gina McCarthy, 13th administrator of the EPA, after a very prolonged confirmation battle, taking over under Obama, a fellow at Harvard formerly, and currently the president and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'd love to start with where we are right now. Seeing the wildfires that are across the West, dealing with the hotter than expected weather, dealing with some of the more active than usual hurricane seasons. Can you put this into perspective for us in terms of how this reflects the global warming cycle that we're in?
Yeah. Well, Lisa, thanks for having me and for beginning with such a depressing question, because you're absolutely right. We are in the most difficult of times. We're dealing with a pandemic, with the economic insecurity and devastation, really, that brings. We add on to the systemic racism that's been challenging us for 4 centuries. And here we are now facing what is essentially one of the most visible ways in which people can finally realize that climate change is not just real, but it's here. And it's impacting human lives in ways that, I don't know if anybody has seen the pictures, but they're frightening. They're absolutely devastating. If you look at pictures of San Francisco right now, you can't see the sun through the smoke, and it has this red glow. It's just terrifying to see the changes that have happened.
It's apocalyptic. I mean, those are the types of words that people are looking at. And then there was a story recently on the Bloomberg terminal that came out. If you want to talk depressing, it's a race against heat and humanity is losing. That was the title. I mean, there's this feeling that we've reached a tipping point of no return. Is that accurate?
Well, that is what we're feeling across the U.S., not just in areas where the heat is resulting in fires. I mean, you see the record heat everywhere. And I think people have known, the scientists have been telling us that when the climate changes, it doesn't go backwards. We have to address this issue, and we have to address it now. Whether or not it's beyond our ability to continue to inhabit the planet, I don't think that's the case, certainly. But we have to start building the future we want to have. We have to take every penny that we're investing in our world moving forward and make sure that it's invested in a way that's smart, that not just takes care of the pandemic and rebuilds our economy, but it has to be based on a clean energy economy. It has to be a clean energy economy that's built with racism and equity as a center for how it is shaped and designed. And if we do that, we can protect our health. We can build our children a future that we can be proud of. But it's a crisis now, and we can't think that we're watching some horror movie. We're watching real life happening now, human lives being taken. And it is time for us, I think, to recognize that even the COVID-19 was a wake-up call. The data that we're looking at from COVID-19 that's telling us that Black Americans are dying from COVID-19 at twice the levels of white Americans has to tell us that these are issues that we need to solve, that are systemic, that are immediate, and need to be resolved now.
I think it's interesting when we talk about environmental issues, you also bring up some of the racial tensions that have pervaded the U.S. and other nations around the world this year. How are they connected?
They're intimately connected. They're part of the same system. And the good news is that you can solve for all of them at the same time through climate solutions. So there's no difference really between racial justice and climate justice. I'm sorry, let me start that again. There's no distinction between the two in terms of how you need to look at them as being absolutely related. Let's look at the people that have been most impacted by pollution traditionally. It has always been the Black community, people of color, poor people who have been on the front line and the fence line of pollution. It's exactly those same people that are most at risk in a changing climate. They are always going to be the front line, the ones that get hurt the most. And if we neglect to think about that, then we won't have the correct strategies to invest in new transportation systems that really put those communities first. We won't be looking at the housing degradation that's followed, racial tensions and problems and disinvestments as opportunities to invest in energy efficiency and better housing. We won't be focused on resilience first in the communities that are most at risk first. So we have to intertwine them. They are not distinct. They are part of the same system that has been relying on fossil fuels for far too long and needs to begin to shift to clean energy that can keep us healthier, that can make us safer, and solve some of these problems together.
So what are some of these transportation systems that have been built in the recent past that you think as being an example of what we ought to be focusing on?
Well, I think we need to recognize a couple of things. While there's a lot of excitement about cleaner cars, and believe me, we need to get tough clean car standards and move to electric vehicles, that's for sure. But at the same time, I already know that we have communities that are being hard hit because they don't have access to good transit solutions now. They're worried about COVID-19 and the safety that poses for going back on the subways. We have buses that are no longer running. So you are talking about trying to invest, in my opinion, in transit. If you really care about getting people to work and you care about cleaning up air quality, it's transit, it's subways, it's buses, it's rebuilding our city streets. It's bringing walking and biking to the fore that can provide huge health benefits in these communities, as well as looking at overall how you develop cleaner vehicles and move to electric vehicles as quick as possible.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the things, the steps that cities could take to be greener, especially at a time that's quite fraught for cities. I mean, this sort of wave of people moving to suburbia. So there's this question of how do you rebuild cities to attract people back to them, but also be greener? What other measures, aside from transportation, do you see as helpful to take?
Yeah. Well, we're doing a lot of work on buildings. I mean, you have energy, you have transportation, you have buildings that all are going to be critical for the continued health and well-being of our cities, which we need. We know that 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions are basically from city living and the neighboring suburbs. So we have to address those issues. When you talk about buildings, we need to look at new building codes. We need buildings that are readily transferred to all electric. We need houses that are built that are more efficient, that have opportunities for electrifying as well. We are talking about making sure that we have parks and playgrounds and walkable places that can actually reduce heat stress in different areas. We have opportunities to rebuild our buildings in ways that make them basically not just highly efficient, but opportunities for heat sinks so that we can actually reflect the heat off of roofs. There are just so many ways in which you can think about investing in cities. You know, if you really want to look at the challenge of affordable housing, then we can start building affordable housing that's highly efficient, that makes it more affordable to live in, but also reduces the amount of electricity that's necessary to heat it and use air conditioning. And if you think people shouldn't have access to air conditioning, I would argue this heat that we're experiencing should tell you exactly the opposite. So let's look at natural solutions. Let's look at allowing people to get around without needing individual vehicles. Let's look at getting the trucks off the road that are dirty diesels because they're causing intense air pollution that's challenging the health and well-being of the communities that are most susceptible to these damages. And so there's lots of things that we can do together, and we are doing together, because in the U.S., cities are really stepping up. We have mayors all over the place in the United States that are exchanging ideas about how to rebuild their cities better, not just reopen them. And there's opportunities for shared engagement in this, shared investments, building EV corridors that are meaningful and provide real choices, because we just have to get rid of the fossil fuels that have been holding us back, and we know is the crux of the challenge for climate change.
You talk about mayors, and that brings me to the question of political will. How much political will is there on a national level to make these types of investments?
Well, we can, I think, have a good conversation about this, but I think COVID-19 matters a lot. I think COVID-19 gave people a wake-up call that the world can change on a dime. I think the fires that we're seeing in California is a stark reality, not to mention all of the crazy storms that are happening in the Midwest and all the flooding that we're seeing. So people, I think, are beginning to get it. They're beginning to recognize that you have to follow the science. You actually have to listen to experts. And they are now beginning to demand solutions that are different. So I think people will not be satisfied if the only thing we do is reopen without recognizing the huge vulnerability that we face if we don't think about building it in a way that is recognizing the challenge of climate and recognizing the need to build resilient infrastructure that can keep our communities protected. So demand is happening. And Lisa, in the US, it takes a long time for federal demand to happen. So while I love the idea that we have folks that may be the next president who care about climate and who want to make all these investments, I know that the demand has to come from the community level and build there and then push at the mayoral level and then push at state level before we're going to make this happen. But we don't have a lot of time, but I think people are ready for it. They know that clean energy is cheaper. They know that that's where the jobs are. This should be this should be the core of our economic strategy, to invest, not spend money. We need to invest in our future, and clean energy is it for jobs as well as our health and our well-being and our national security.
All right, Gina, I want to get to the price tag and how potentially this could change people's livelihoods. But before we get there, you did mention we may actually have someone in the White House who may actually care about this issue and take measures. I assume you're talking about Joe Biden. President Trump has been pretty vocal about his support of the fossil fuel industry, trying to bring some support to coal mines in addition to a whole host of other areas. How much, from your perspective, coming from the Obama administration, how much has the Trump administration set some of the goals back toward achieving a carbon neutral type of footprint for the United States?
Well, I think the Trump administration has tried its best to stop all of this and reverse it back to coal, but it's not working. Over a 5-year stretch, the clean energy jobs have grown at 70% faster than the overall job growth. So we know what we're talking about. Three times more people are working in clean energy than have been working in fossil fuels before we had the COVID-19 hit, and we'll rebuild the jobs that we've lost there. So this administration has done its best. But, NRD has sued this administration more than 100 times, and we have a 90+% rate in our success because they haven't followed the law. They haven't followed science. So like much of this administration, it's a lot of hot air and very little to back it up. What we have lost is time. And in a climate crisis, frankly, that's the biggest loss we can have. We don't need to stay the same. We need to move forward as quickly as possible. And that's where we need to regroup. And I think, a next president has to recognize that they're going to be judged by whether or not they can keep people healthy and safe and rebuild this economy. And if you want to do all of those and center racial equity, then you have to look at clean energy as the path forward.
So let's talk about the price tag. What are you thinking?
Well, if you ask me how much I would spend on clean energy in the future for our kids, I'd say all of it.
Well, okay,
that's my price tag.
All right. So everything that anyone has. Go ahead.
Well, the U.S., like other countries, spends a lot of money all the time. All I'm suggesting is that if you want to rebuild the future and you want to do it in a way that is safer and healthier, then you have to look at a clean energy future. You have to look at a clean energy future that centers on rebuilding the communities that have been left behind. And so
Okay.
there's no question that everybody's had different levels of investment that they're talking about. But frankly, all I want to do is make sure that the money we usually spend is spent wisely, and that the money we need to get out of this economic hole and put people back to work is spent wisely. And if that's all you want to do, then every penny of that is going to be building a future that we can be proud of, one that won't leave us exactly where we were prior to COVID-19.
Perhaps another way of looking at this is if we were to make a meaningful dent in our footprint,
Yeah.
how
Yep.
drastically would our day-to-day lives change? How different would they look?
Yeah. Well, I think what we're looking at right now, at least at NRDC, is we're looking at moving away from fossil fuel vehicles by 2035, right? That's just stop selling anything other than a fuel cell or an electric vehicle. So that means change. But does it mean drastic change right now? No, it doesn't. Do we have the technologies that can support it? Absolutely. Do we need to start working with communities on how to make this real? Absolutely. But I do not believe that we are talking about spending more money. I believe what we're talking about is spending our money wisely in a way that won't allow us to actually have the same kind of safety and health challenges. So I'm talking about way more savings than I am talking about expense. If you look just at what we need to shift our fossil fuel industry from reliance on fossil fuels and into a clean energy economy, which most of us are looking at, again, a 2035 window, we think that you can do that in a way that's going to save enough lives and enough damage from excess storms to pay for itself way beyond what it would have cost us. So this is one of those things where I don't know whether the number is the next president should spend $2 trillion rebuilding the economy. But all I know is that every bit of what's spent needs to be looked at in a different way to build back a future we're going to be proud to hand to our children. And if we do that, then I think we will win.
I think a lot of people would agree with you. I think that some of the pushback, at least from what I've heard of individuals across America, is, are you saying that I should become a vegetarian and never use my truck and basically go off the grid and get solar panels and live this sort of esoteric life? I mean, that's sort of the cliche that's portrayed with the idea that cow burps are really a huge methane contributor. Can you sort of give a sense of where the reality in this cliche is and where the fiction is?
Well, it's really silly. Some of the ways in which people are projecting this is silly. I've been in government for a long time, and I've never sold something that basically said you need to change the way in which you live your life. Good for you. We're going to make you do that. Or say sacrifice is wonderful. Do it for your neighbor. That's just not the way you do it. You have to develop technologies and systems and practices that make our lives easier and better, that don't take away the richness of our life, that give us an ability to actually continue to live in ways that we will thoroughly enjoy. If people think that's how we're living now, then I think they need to wake up. We are not enjoying the fullness of life, everybody. We have communities that have been left behind and overburdened by pollution that are on the front lines of climate. So not everybody is interested in preserving every moment of their life. They're interested in a better life. And so I don't think that we have to give up in order to get the richness of life that we all are used to and want to have. I have driven an electric vehicle. I've recently purchased one. If you think I'm sacrificing as a result of that, you're wrong. But am I one of the few who can afford to buy one? Yeah, but I love it. So we are not talking about sacrificing here. If my house is hugely efficient and I save money so I can buy a better house next time because I've saved, or spend that money on buying Netflix for my TV.
Yeah.
Am I worse off? I mean, seriously here. It's ridiculous to suggest that we have to sacrifice to get better. Nowhere near that. No,
All right.
I don't believe
Gina, the other thing, some people have said that there's sort of this ironic secondary effect of the pandemic, the fact that we've all sat home and wondered what to do with our lives, but we haven't taken airplanes, we haven't driven our cars around. This has actually bought us some time with respect to emissions output. How much time has it bought us?
Well, unless we find options to actually live life a bit differently moving forward out of the gate, it's not going to have bought us a lot of time. I'm not looking at this as COVID-19 as some kind of hidden gem it's exposed. There is nothing good about COVID-19. And we know that as soon as we start kicking off again, we're going to have the greenhouse gas emissions start creeping up again. We have to look at systemic and fundamental change. And I'm not talking about change in the way people behave as much as the way in which we allow people to live. I just think the idea that technology improvements we've invested in over the past 20 years, like clean energy, have detriments to them, and that people are so in love with fossil fuels, I think it's just ridiculous. We just want to live healthy lives. We just want to be able to turn our electricity on and make it come on. We want to have heat and we want to have air conditioning when it's too hot. If you can deliver that in different ways, nobody's going to ask you why you shut down my coal plant. Nobody's going to ask you about jobs lost if you can replace those jobs with other good jobs. And that's the challenge we have. We can't leave anybody behind.
So with the backdrop of the apocalyptic scenes that we're seeing in California, with the pandemic, with the hurricanes that keep coming through, with that as our backdrop, what are the goals that we have to hit, in your view, from the latest science in order to avoid a worsening cycle with the Arctic melting faster, leading to, I don't know, an even worse year than 2020?
God help us. Let's hope not. Clearly, as science has developed and shown us, we have to look at 1.5 degrees centigrade. We can't keep talking about 2. So we have to get accelerated in reductions in greenhouse gases. So you're talking about real investment and real market signals that need to be sent right out of the gate. I'm looking at the plans that have been put out by the House Select Committee on Climate Change recently, and that is looking at getting to the kind of reductions by 2050 that we need and what the costs are associated with that, and they're all overwhelming benefits. And so it's a pretty comprehensive plan that I think people ought to look at. I'm looking at the President Biden's plans, which are equally ambitious. But we are talking about, getting at the power sector being clean by 2035, getting people to make the shift away from selling, fossil fuel vehicles by 2035 so that we can get to zero by 2050. So it's big change that needs to happen quickly. And obviously, the quicker we can do it, the better off we are. And I think getting out of the gate quickly to ensure that every country is investing in a clean technology future and a clean energy future out of the gate as our way to build out of COVID-19 is going to be one of the most significant benefits that we can put on the table quickly. And I'm excited by what the EU has laid out about understanding that you really need to dedicate a significant portion of the money that you expend in government to actually make this transition happen.
Gina, we started on a pretty pessimistic, dark note. I want to end just to get your sense on the pendulum of optimism and pessimism. Optimism being that we might survive and thrive, and maybe my children will have great-grandchildren who will still be on this earth and won't have to be in spacesuits, to, pessimism, which is the opposite. Where are you?
Well, for the past 4 years, I've watched an administration do everything humanly possible to make the vast majority of my life irrelevant in terms of its work. And it hadn't worked. Just the opposite. I am really excited about the climate solutions we have available today that don't require sacrifice, that will provide huge benefits. I know that the systemic racism and the challenges we're facing today feel uncomfortable, but they are exactly the kind of discomfort we need to make our country stronger and more economically stronger. And so it's about time that we face these issues. And the exciting part of today is that I think people are ready for change. I think they're crying for it. I think they know that rolling back all these issues is not the way to go, that we have to build our kids a hopeful future. So I'm giving us an extraordinarily hopeful B+ to A-, that we're
All
going to
right.
get there, and we're going to get there soon, and we're going to get out of the gate flying, because we have no choice. We love our kids, right? We love our life. I don't
Usually.
want to live at my dining room table for the rest of my life.
Gina, thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa. It was really fun.